Okay, so I don't have a whole lot of notes for this particular meeting. Wasn't quite as prepared as I was for the others, but that's okay. There's really only a couple topics to go over, but if either of you or anyone else that shows up has something they want to talk about, we can definitely bring it up. So first thing, I just wanted to mention real quick how last time we had a meeting a few months ago, we were talking about doing a test tournament, and we did in fact end up running that in March. Um, I'm trying and failing to find my notes on what exactly I had for that. I know that I wrote down a bunch of things that needed to get changed, but I can't for the life of me find them. But I know that there were a bunch of issues with, for instance, it not communicating very well about what deck it was you had selected. We need to add features such as the ability for administrators to add people directly to a tournament, so that people can register and sign up ahead of time, and then people just need to be able to check in as opposed to registering. Um, and I seem to recall that there were also not very good communication over when, like, I don't know. I guess that there's that one chat message that goes out that says, "Oh yeah, there's another round starting in X minutes." I would like that to be controlled by the moderators. Have the message go out, but have it not start until someone hits play, just so that we can be sure that there's no like last minute mess ups or anything. Okay, so beyond that, I got two things here for us to discuss, new topics. First is I want to go over the World Championship announcement. Although we have announced that we are doing a World Championship, we haven't yet released the specific, well, any of the specifics really. And so this page is what I have been slowly putting together, and I think it's just about ready. The only detail that it is currently waiting on is that the guy here, Harry Duff, who has wanted to donate some plaques, we have got the designs from him, but he has not yet put those together. And so maybe I can just announce it with those designs. Where were those?
Very cool that there are people donating prizes for this.
Oh yeah, like it's pretty awesome. But so these are the mock-ups that he put together, and so these are the drafts that I approved. So I think that it's going to be pretty cool.
It's awesome.
I still find it funny that the logo of the Crown of Gondor and laurels that you threw together one night stuck so well.
I throw a lot of things together at the last minute, but that particular one I think does actually work really well, like you say. Some of the others, like the PC logo, for instance, I'm not terribly happy with it, and hopefully someone with better design chops will be able to come up with one eventually. But yeah, sometimes the stars align. One of the things, so obviously, yeah, the prize sponsors are the big highlight here is that we have a couple of we have people from Card Game Geek and Category One Games who have pledged various prizes. And so if we come down here to the both the group stage and the championship tournament sections, there are things that have been vouched from either one. And we can see that they're color coded here. Card Game Geeks are in teal, and Category One Games stuff is in orange. Um, and so it's now all been laid out pretty distinctly. Do I even have the plaque on here? I do not have the plaque listed, so I'll have to update the list for that. But once that is done, I think that that's pretty much the last detail that we're waiting on, like I mentioned. So, for individuals to enter the World Championship, they're going to need two things. They're going to need to, well, three things actually. First, they're going to need to register. We do not yet have the registration form put together, but I have put together a reminder form where people can sign up to be reminded at various stages of the process. Um, but we will need to set that up. The reason that I have not set this up yet is because we don't yet have the details figured out on what PayPal account donations and stuff will be going to. I actually need to go talk to a lawyer or something about incorporation. I want to see if setting up an organization would be something that could be straightforward and simple or not. And I feel like this is something I'm a bit out of my depth for. I did contact the Star Trek continuing committee to see what they did. They just threw together a 401c7, I want to say, 501c7, which is
401c3 is nonprofit.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what the other is.
and I believe that the nonprofit is the way that the Star Wars Players Committee is set up. But they had official backing and help by Decipher back in the day to get organized like that. The Star Trek group, on the other hand, the C7 is basically a membership only club. I'm not quite sure how they. I probably should reach out again and see what that is in relation to. Is it just the Players Council, and so the members of the Players Council are considered the members, or are the members of the Star Trek community considered the members? Basically, from what
Hmm.
I've read up on it, it's basically anybody that's trying to run a club or an exclusive members only bar or whatever. That's essentially what those sorts of groups are set up for.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, so I think that it would at least give us the ability to say, okay, yes, we have a business entity. That business entity has this actual bank account and this actual PayPal account that are tied to just the organization, so that it's not strictly tied to me as an individual or anybody else as an individual. One downside, however, to incorporating is that we would have to actually come up with bylaws and things like that. We have been kind of going fly by night, and I have, for the most part, just tied everything to myself, such as the GAMP accounts and stuff like that, or the hosting account that the GAMP runs on. I mean, and so we would have to come up with officers, and we would have to come up with procedures and processes for how people join and how people um, go to a particular level, and that is not particularly enticing to me. I feel like we're still not at the point where we have enough people and enough of a structure for that to make sense. But if that's what's required to incorporate, I feel like that might be important. But worst
I
It
comes to
might not be.
worst,
suspect.
sorry, go for it. Go ahead.
It might not be a change for the worst. A little more structure might encourage people to actually join.
It might.
And I
It
bet
might.
there's all kinds of just like startup templates that you could use to take the not do that work yourselves
True.
or ourselves.
True. Um, Either way, it's something that needs to get figured out. Worst comes to worst, if I can't figure out a good way to do that, because the deadline here is coming up before we're going to need to start taking registrations and stuff. I'll just tie it to my personal PayPal account. I'm not particularly worried about it being a problem initially. That's exactly what the GEMP and everything is running on my personal stuff. So I mean, it works. But if there's ever problems in the future, it would be nice to not be the one with the target on his back. But at any rate, so after we've had somebody register, the system that I had set up before also said that you had to get yourself a championship ticket and an invitation to enter the group stage. So a championship ticket, the system that I've devised here is that you have to either pay for your own ticket, just sending a $5 purchase to the PayPal account, or individuals within the community will be able to make themselves contender sponsors, in which case they could just purchase as many tickets as they like without needing to enter themselves. And then on the registration form, I intend to have an area that says, I either can't use PayPal because I'm in one of the various countries that doesn't is not able to use it, or I do not have a means of accessing PayPal, or just straight up I can't afford it.
Mm.
Because different people in different walks of life, not to mention, $5 USD could theoretically, I think, be paid for just about anywhere, but you never know. Um, and so I would like that to be an option so that people that are looking to compete can receive those donations. Um, and then, of course, like I say here, anything excess will just go towards paying for the server costs and the shipping of the physical prizes. So yeah, I feel like that's probably the best balance between accessibility and uh, accountability. Having people actually need to default to paying for their own stuff, but if they can't, we have a way of connecting generous people with people that don't have the means. So after you've registered, after you've obtained yourself a ticket one way or another, you will then be able to enter the walk-on qualifiers at that point. But if you want to skip the line, you can earn yourself an invitation, which I think this part is fairly clear to the community. You can come in first at any monthly PC Weekend Qualifier League. We will also be running those format championships in about August, and the winners of those championships will automatically earn themselves an invitation. There's also at least one physical event, the French Open, that has contacted me, and they wanted to see if we could get somebody hooked up, and so I said yes. And if anybody else is going to run a community event, so long as it's something that is actually a true event and not just two guys colluding to try and get themselves an invite, I am open to extending that. But those are the primary ways of getting an invitation, or sorry, those are, I think, the flashiest ways of getting an invitation. But the primary way, I think, is going to be the walk-on qualifiers. That is where the bulk of those invitations are going to come from. So here we have lists and links to all the people that have currently gotten themselves an invite. 3 more weekend leagues are going to be running, one for each league, and then after that point we'll be doing the championships. And then so for the walk-on qualifiers, so far basically the way that I'm thinking it is that we're just going to schedule a bunch of automated Swiss tournaments in GEMP. You join them, you compete in them, and then once all of them have ran, we basically say that, okay, there's going to be 32 slots or 64 slots, however many it was that we decided on. We'll basically sort everybody by performance in those Swiss tournaments, and then we just start handing them out one at a time until we run out of slots. After we subtracted out the slots for these various winners up here.
When you say sort by performance, is that on a per tournament basis, or are you looking at the expectation of people competing in several of them across and
that
compiling
is
results?
Something I'm not sure of, to be honest. I think that we could permit people to enter multiple if they wanted, and that we could just take their best score and eliminate all the rest. I think that's one way of doing it, and frankly, I think that it's probably better to be flexible like that, especially since each of these are going to be different time zones and different formats. I think that letting it be as flexible as possible is probably the best way to go.
You'll probably want to make sure that they use the same deck between events, though, because they'll just modify it to improve it based on their experience.
Is that problematic for
I
what
don't know.
equate to
I'm just
separate
bringing it up
tournaments?
because it could be an issue.
It's going to be difficult to enforce. That's something that we would have to start tracking. GEMP is very dumb when it comes to decks. It considers any deck with the same name to be the same deck, so we would have to start tracking that ourselves, pulling out the information. I guess that tournaments do. There's no recent tournaments for me to look at, but the deck list would come up here. That they do get saved in here, but we would have to start basically manually checking everybody that entered multiple ones and ensuring that their deck was the same.
When Decipher would run Worlds, wouldn't they require you to submit your deck list before walking into the event and whatnot?
Yes.
For any major tournament you had to, but it was only for that one tournament. I don't believe for multi-day or if you qualified for nationals because you won states, you didn't have to bring the deck that you won states with to nationals.
They're probably dumb to bring that deck.
and if you tried to enter multiple states, I don't think that they would enforce you. If you made your way to the event, then that was all that you had to do. You didn't have to.
Right. Yeah. Because they looked at every winner of states got, I think, a bye past day one or round one. I know we had people come in from New York by the van load here to compete because theirs was always before us, and if everyone who didn't get the bye there came and tried to get it here.
I think it would be okay to just let it be a free for all. I mean, it's going to be a bit of a slog anyway for you to get up at a time zone that's not necessarily yours. 12 hours, offset or however many it is. So yeah, I mean, dedicated people are going to get 2 bites at the apple, I suppose, but at the same time, those are kind of the people we're trying to filter for anyway. If you're going to try that hard, maybe you should get a second shot.
So go ahead.
I'm just noticing something with the walk-on page. I thought it was just the group stage that required the registration and the ticket.
Nope.
Oh, okay.
I expanded it to the walk on because I feel like so how many did we say? 64 slots, I believe. Yeah, 64 slots. So with 64 slots, I expect there to be somewhat more actual people attempting to qualify. Kind of the guess that I've been making is around 100 people. So 100 people with a $5 thing is going to give us a $500 budget, about half of which would be easily eaten up by shipping costs. Um, and then, but that gives us a buffer so that if there are additional issues, such as needing to ship things multiple times, or if something like that happens, it gives us just a little bit of leeway because there's going to be a number of things shipped out. Um, we've got 8 different boxes going here. We have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12 different shipments here. So I mean, like it's gonna add up, I think.
It won't be cheap, yeah.
Yeah. But yes. So and also to Double Hooks' point, he was the one that talked about accountability. I think that it does make people treat it a little bit more seriously. Um, to an individual, I think $5 is not going to be a huge deal, but it is at least going to give just that little bit of weight to say, yeah, I paid for this. You know, I should show up. I should actually set the time aside and all that. So, or I am utilizing someone else's generosity. Taking a donated ticket, so I shouldn't let them down, kind of thing.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't think I quite understand yet how you pick amongst the tournament attendees.
And that's partially because I have not yet figured out the exact details on that myself.
Okay, and
I had,
that's
yeah.
totally fair. I think people will want to know before signing up. If it's kind of all 3 tournaments combined, but somebody doesn't play expanded, for example, they might
So
choose
I wasn't
to
planning
kind
on
of.
doing that. What I was basically planning on was um, trying to figure. So every tournament here is going to have about 4 games. Yeah. So a minimum of 3 games and a maximum of 6 games. So I was basically just planning on sorting everybody by score, just raw score. You had a kind of like what we do with the regular leagues, where you get 2 points per win and 1 point per loss. And if you and just kind of go down the line, kind of as an aggregate score between all 6 of these events. Um, so the person who went 4-0 at the US PC fodder is going to be near the top. And so if this one is more popular, and so there end up being around 6 rounds for that, then the person that goes 6-0 is going to be rated higher than the person that went 4-0 here. But I'm kind of hoping that the way that all shakes out, there's going to be about 40 slots or so. So we just kind of go down the list and assign the top 40 best performing individuals at all of these events. And
You're
so
going to need to be careful with different amounts of rounds doing that, because somebody going 4-0 is going to rank lower than somebody who went 3-3.
let's see. So 4-0 person is going to have 8 points. 3-3 is going to get you 6 plus 3 is 9 points. Yeah, you're right. That is true.
I don't know if that needs to be a tweaking of the way points work, or if you want to look at maybe, there's 6 tournaments here, so the top 4 in each get in, and then you look at, top points for the bigger tournaments kind of thing. But
Yeah,
probably want to have it understood ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean that's totally fair. I'm not sure how to do this myself. Is part of part of why I haven't already written it up. Um, so we can probably throw together some proposals and bring that up on the PC channel and see if we can hammer those details out. Um,
Cool.
the thing about the number of Swiss rounds is that in GEMP at least, it's based on the number of people that sign up. So it's a little tricky ahead of time to determine how many rounds there are going to be, without actually seeing how many people actually get their butts in seats. Kind of a chicken and egg problem, actually, because until people have registered, we won't have any good guesses about what attendance is going to be like.
Yeah, there's probably a way of doing it by percentage or something as well. If we have 100 attendees and 64 slots, so the top 64% of players from each tournament get in. But of course, then you're going to have people overlapping. Somebody who plays in 3 tournaments and plays as well doesn't get 3 seats.
Right, yeah, and
Yeah.
that was kind of what I mentioned before. If somebody enters multiple, I would say just get their best performance and knock out the rest, and just eliminate them from the listing otherwise. But yeah, I don't know. We'll have to run some tests here and just try to come up with some do some, what do they call it? Just workshopping it. Yeah. Okay. So we'll definitely figure out the details on that, and then either way, 64 invites will go out to winners of the walk-ons and all these winners up here of these various other events, and that'll get us the group stage. And these parts, I think, are the details are pretty well hammered out. 8 Swiss rounds specifically, with this number of invitations, start time, approximate end time. Uh, that one's fairly straightforward, and then we just literally sort by performance in the Swiss, and the top 8 go on to the championship tournament, which again is much more structured. I think we have all the details figured out on that. And then the individual rulings. This is basically all the individual, I don't know, loopholes that I and Cease and other people have pointed out. So this is how we're going to handle those various issues. I won't go over all of them here, but if anybody wants to go over those at the link that we'll provide and see if there's anything wonky, we can of course just throw something in here. Like for instance, one of the Decipher World Championships near the end, it was like in 2006 or 2007. Both individuals were part of a team, and they had decided that they were just not going to play, and they just split the top 1 and top 2 prizes between them. I have decided that is pretty anticlimactic. I don't care if you're on the same team. So if you're going to be a finalist, you cannot split the prize. You have to play your match, and if you both disagree and you both decide you're going to try and weasel out, then you will both be disqualified, and it'll move on to the next 2. So I can't imagine that any 2 people, even if they were on the same team, would not want to play their final match. But either way, we have at least closed off that particular loophole.
Yeah,
if they
it
live
sounds
close
like.
enough,
Go ahead.
if they live close enough that they want to meet up and they split up the prize, whatever, we don't care. But
Yeah.
we're not going to do it for you.
Yeah, exactly. And we want the spectacle, we want the prestige and all that. So yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
so this is just about ready then. I will put together some. Let's see. So we need to figure out the walk on procedure for eliminating or for calculating score between separate tournaments and determining who gets slots. So I will follow up on that and write some stuff up on the PC channel.
On a slight tangent, we should probably put out a call for someone to assemble the comprehensive rules 5.0.
Yes,
because they will want a lot of time.
Yes. So I do in fact have a kind of a placeholder here. We actually need to update this. The comprehensive rules 4.1 has been updated more frequently. And so this actually has more stuff in it than the 5.0 does. But so we basically just need to copy paste everything from 4.1 into 5.0 and then start adding in some of our individual wordings and things like that. For the most part, I don't think that we have diverged all that much. We'll need to make a list of specific errata that these are all the errata that will be played under. We need to add definitions for things like item, which is a term that we started using that is not actually defined under Decipher rules. A couple of things like that, but I don't think that we have diverged. Now, that may change by the time that the World Championship comes about. There are some smaller changes that I would like to incorporate if I can accomplish them, such as being able to inspect your opponent's discard pile and things like that. They're kind of finicky from a coding perspective, but besides that, if I can get that in, I would be more than happy to have that be a part of the whole experience.
Yeah, and since there's no way to enforce no card counting,
Exactly,
by
and you
someone
have,
doing it mentally.
yeah, well, not
Well,
not even mentally,
it's in
like
the chat.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like I've always thought that if somebody was to sit here and write up a script that would just, you know, list all this out and put it over here on a separate tab or something, that would be trivial. Um, and so
It-
I don't like the fact that a cheater could have more information than a regular person when, it should be as simple as just being able to come over here and inspect the discard pile. Like it's not that big. It's not that big a deal.
Yeah,
it's
I don't
so
know of
easy to
many other
get.
games that don't allow that.
Yeah, and Magic does. Magic allows it, for crying out loud. So I see no reason to keep it secret. That I mean, the
And
only
especially
go ahead.
between between it being available in chat, but also the nature of GEMP, where we don't necessarily see every card as it's discarded or
Yeah,
kind of shuffled back in. Like you sit across the table from somebody and they play Goblin Sneak, and they show you what card they're putting underneath the deck.
yeah,
In GEMP, it's easy for that to get lost. So
exactly.
you can search the chat. There's no reason that you shouldn't be able to do it faster just by
Yeah,
clicking on their discard
just
pile.
by inspecting it. Yeah, so yeah, so there's that. There's a handful of other small incidental things that I think ought to get altered. If we end up getting around to altering the mulligans or anything like that, that may be slightly bigger, but um, we may not have time to adjust that before the World Championship. But anyway, we definitely have this place that should hold all of those changes, whatever they may be. It would be nice for us to have a rules master that holds on to all this. And frankly, I think that we could bear to organize this a little better than the original. The first portion of the comprehensive rules is basically a rehash of the starting rules, and it's basically teaching somebody how to play the game. I don't think that we need that in our official setup. We just need to take the information in here that is unique and plop it into its own section. Um, and yeah, but you're right. Somebody should definitely take that on as a bit of a project.
Sounds like one
If
of
we,
those roles in the officers group of the club you're talking about.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was about to say. Is that if there is not a rules master role, I will get annoyed.
So like we have theoretical groups between Errata, new set creation, which Finarfin is about the only like team captain we really have for creating V sets, which I think is a shame that we don't have anything else. But
It's more of a
make
50-50 now, even than a team captain thing.
true, yeah, since
I think I
Finarfin
end up doing
has
more work, but I'm a-okay with that.
yeah. And then also there's development of GEMP. There is archiving resources, so that's like handling the wiki and such. And I feel like this would also eventually, but yeah, that could very easily be its own thing. I know that the Star Wars CCG has a rules master and a rules team. That's where that's all they do. And then communicating and attracting new players. That would be another group. But lots of stuff that could happen, but we just don't have people that come up and say, "Yeah, I want to do this." Lots of people join the PC and then say, "Well, yeah, I'll just talk about stuff," but they don't take any projects under their wing. Um, Once again, Finarfin being one of the exceptions, he came on and he was like, "Yes, I want to do these sets." So I'm not quite sure how to change that. I have put out calls in the past, and very seldom does anyone step forward and say, "Yes, I will do that." And in other cases, they do say it, and then slowly kind of disappear. So it's tough. Anyway, so anything else to say about the up and coming um, World Championship announcements before we move on?
Only thing I can think of is what formats we're doing for the championships.
Yes. So the group stage, I think. So what I have here is that there's going to be 8 rounds of Swiss with a break in the middle. So I figured that it would make sense to do PC fodder for the first 4, and the next 4 would be PC movie. I understand that Magic the Gathering does something similar where they have you go through different rounds of sealed versus constructed, um, and well, we wouldn't necessarily do that here, but I think that that's probably the cleanest way for us to introduce the two main formats. As for the championship tournament, I haven't quite figured out what we're doing here, and I am open to opinions here. Definitely, the finals will be PC movie. That part is straightforward. Um, but so let me pull up the document here. What was it? The Yeah, so double elimination was the one that we thought was going to be our best bet here. So if you're not familiar, the way that double elimination works is that everybody starts in the same bracket, but then when you lose, instead of being knocked out of the tournament, you get knocked down into the losers bracket, which ends up having more overall matches than the winners bracket does. If you lose when you're in the losers bracket, that's when you get knocked out of the tournament. So you basically have a leeway of one game. If you lose a match, you can still go on to win the tournament, so long as you don't lose any matches after that point. And so one of the things that I thought, for instance, is that PC Movie is played using, or sorry, that the winners bracket is played using PC Movie, and the losers bracket plays using PC Fodder. We could also just do something where alternating rounds are played between Movie and Fellowship, ensuring that the last best of three between the final two are Movie. We could just do away with all that and just say sorry that like we're just doing PC Movie for the final day. There's a few different ways we can do it, so I'm open to opinions on that.
Having it alternate every round could seriously mess with someone's brain, having to flip between two different, different styles of gameplay.
Mm-hmm. That's a valid point.
When I was talking about formats, I was actually talking about the ones we're running in August, but this also needs to be talked about, so it's fine.
Oh, gotcha. I kind of like the poetry of being knocked
Knocked into Fellowship.
you got banished from Movie. You weren't able to hack it.
And then you get your big redeeming moment at the end where you pull Movie back out for the final
Exactly.
event.
Hopefully, or get crushed a second time, like one of the two.
But you show yourself as the best Fellowship player in the
Yeah, exactly.
world.
I got knocked down the first round, and then I owned everybody, and then got killed again by besiegers.
Hopefully, besiegers will be under control.
Yeah, hopefully. I feel like we've hit some of their main toys, but not all of them. So I'm still not sure. There's no clear, obvious like GLR type card except for Grand, and we've already addressed Grand, and I think that it's not nearly as much of a problem as it was before. Although
yeah, unfortunately,
I don't have the data to back that up. Unfortunately, I need to get on Stormborn Slade's case to see if we can get that stuff automated. Because when he's able to make those spreadsheets for us, it's amazing. But I would like to get that so that it does not require anybody to have any spare time on it. Okay, well, we can talk about that. I'll bring that up. So specific. Execution formats in the. So what you were asking about was for the championship tournaments.
Yes.
I was basically planning on having these just straight up be King of the Hill Swiss, where everybody comes on at this time. You play, whoever has the best score at the end wins. We would introduce some structure in the form of timing and announcements and stuff like that. But I was basically planning on it being the same tournament format that is already used within GEP, with the daily and the ad hoc tournaments. And then, of course, as far as whoops, meant to be looking at. Yeah, here. So obviously, as far as format goes, then that's just whatever format it is for the particular championship. But yeah, knockout Swiss tournament was basically what I was, or sorry, not knockout, but just standard automated Swiss tournament, King of the Hill. Whoever has the best score at the end wins.
I'm not entirely sure I see the point of running PC formats in the championships because that's what the whole World Championship's going to be about. I feel like we had previously discussed that the format championships would be Decipher format, so you can still prove that you're, say, the best at regular movie, and then that gets you a spot, but you still have to learn to figure out PC movie.
I can see the arguments for both. The thing I like about the having a PC championship is that you can say, okay, yes, like I actually got to sit down and I none of this juggling, none of this other details. It was just, do I have the best PC fodder deck? Do I have the best PC expanded deck? Um, and unlike the leagues, the weekend leagues, which are kind of that, there's no flubbing about with time zones and did I happen to go up against a bunch of weak guys or not. It's just more of a structured, serious competitive event, which we've already butted up against some of the casual aspects of the weekend leagues.
Mm.
So that was my thinking behind giving a competitive space for running in those, even though we do run those every month with the weekend leagues. And then as far as the deciphered formats are concerned, I am more than happy to allocate some time to them. Um, I don't have any opinions necessarily on which formats we would run, except that I feel like this would also be a time to let people that don't have an equivalent to um, show their metal. Like for instance, we could open it up to have a tower standard, which does not have an equivalent in PC. Um,
I'm sure we've got at least one player who would love King Standard to be an option.
I can't imagine who.
yeah.
King
Um,
Standard actually would be a good idea, just because like we're touting that our formats are balanced, doing similarly balanced formats like Towers and King Standard.
I,
I don't
I
think
really
there's any
like the
like
idea of King Standard. I just wish there was a PC King Standard. I'd play a lot more of it if we also had all the current errata.
well, part of the point of PC Movie is to get it down to where it's not ridiculous.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely can appreciate that.
And I kind of feel like in the past we did kind of go back and forth a little bit over what specific formats we were going to have and support as a PC. We ended up on a smaller number just to make sure that we weren't spread too thin. But there's also the argument that, well, if let's say that PC King Standard did exist, if it was good, then it would end up siphoning away a lot of attention from PC Movie, and so then we don't have um, the I don't know the drive to fix PC Movie as much because oh hey they can just go to PC King Standard. But I don't know.
Devil's advocate. Kind of like doing Fellowship first. It could let you have a smaller set of things to work on next, and then continue to have that goal of PC movie being the golden format, but
Right.
taking it in smaller chunks.
Mhm. And we did kind of do that, to be honest. We a lot of the X list was it was heavily fellowship based, um, and then we've of course had our V1 set that was targeting PC fodder, and so we've had a lot more targeted errata that were for PC fellowship. Um, Again, I don't have a great data over how well we have done with that, but I do feel like fellowship has gotten more attention than the other two um, in the past. And then movie has had a couple of scalpel level errata to PC to Lady Redeemed and Grand and Castamere and a few other things, but it hasn't had like the grand scope errata, which is the sort of thing I have been trying to do with the most recent errata batch, trying to really attack it at its roots.
Mm.
But because I feel like we did do a good job of that with Fellowship. Like we had the buff errata to dwarves, which were struggling. We had, um, you know, just by dint of doing the X list, we ended up bringing Isengard down a few notches. There's ongoing work for us to do, but I feel like Fellowship has been really mixed up, which is really my goal when it comes to all this, is making it so that it's no longer absolutely obvious and certain what the proper strategies are. So I consider that a job well done, and we can continue to do that as time goes on. But movie has not had nearly as much attention put to it.
And I don't think all the ones that you brought up are necessarily parts of the problem. Like, I never saw the problem with, say, Safe from the Fire, just because it cost 3 and you were getting rid of a companion in your fellowship. Now, granted, you could just grab 3, but that's also throwing out a buttload of Twilight,
So
which
this comes
is.
down to our big set of discussions and people's manifestos over what errata should be, and I know
Mm.
that my position is a little bit different. So I come from the angle of treating it the way that Dota treats their balance patches, which is to say that when coming in to try and make changes, it's not obviously you do want to try and make a balanced game, but the nature of the beast is that it's never actually going to be possible for every single card and every single strategy and every single deck to have even footing. Um, StarCraft, I feel, is the game that has come the closest to ever having a truly balanced battlefield where no matter what race you play, every matchup can theoretically be as close as possible to a 50% win rate, to where it really just comes down to your skill versus their skill. There's no, oh, you picked the winning race. It's, yeah, I beat you. And it's not because we had different characters. It's just, straight up, I had better experience, better execution, better map awareness, whatever. Um, it's difficult to do such a thing in a game, but not impossible. But I feel like we need to strive for balance, but I don't think we're ever going to get balance, if that makes sense. Obviously, if there's a card that has a 60% win rate, we need to address it. If there's a card that is straight up garbage, we need to address it. But when it gets to the middle of that bell curve, it's really, really difficult to actually sit down and say, yes, this game is now perfectly balanced. No matter what strategy you use, you're going to have an even footing against every other strategy. I don't think that it's actually possible to get to that point. And so, my perspective is that what we should be doing is mixing things up. That, okay, you've solved the problem more or less, you have figured out the meta, you know which decks are on top. We're now going to come here and disrupt that knowledge. We're going to come in here and we're going to say, all right, I know that you figured out that Knights Besiegers is the best, or whatever. We're now going to make that assumption uncertain. We're going to hit some of these cards that make those decks good. We're going to buff a bunch of other stuff that now makes you question, is Knight still on top? Are Besiegers still on top? And I know that Knights aren't necessarily on top in the movie, just using it as an example. So that is the perspective that I come in here with Errata. So when it comes to Save from the Fire is an obvious good thing. That, yes, it has a cost to it, but let's be real, take any 3 cards from your deck is always a good thing. That is all, like, if you can fit it into your strategy, you want it. There's no strategy that does not want that, right? So
Yeah.
that's what I'm attacking, is the obviousness of how good that card is and how well it plays in with every strategy. If it goes from take 3 cards into my hand and changes it to, for instance, the 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 first proposal that I had, where it puts 1 in your hand, 1 in your deck, and 1 in your discard pile, that is suddenly much less of a certain obvious good, especially when you have to draw some of those things that you stack the deck with. Um, but so it's that uncertainty that I'm trying to get to, because we don't want a game that is absolutely figured out, right? Because if it's absolutely figured out, then you end up with what essentially Fellowship was over 10 years, where, okay, you play Last Alliance and you play Isengard. Those are the ones that are on top. Those are the situations that always win. And you don't want that fossilization to happen. Anyway, I'll stop talking and let you guys respond.
I tend to agree with your perspective on movie. I think it's also a lot harder for movie to get to that point just because it's so much bigger. I mean, I think the statistic you brought up was Fellowship is somewhere around 3,000, movie is double that, right?
So there's about 500 cards um, in in Fellowship, and maybe closer to 600. But with 10 sets, yeah, it's closer to 1,000 or 1,200 or something like that.
So my point would be that you don't, first of all, it's not as much of a worry that it gets all um, fossilized because someone will try something new and wacky and it'll happen to take down the top deck. I think that yes, maybe something like Safe from the Fire could be shook up. I just don't like the idea of fundamentally changing what it does. Like that's why I really liked Chadwick's suggestion. Let me pull it up. Of having it, you can take up to three, but every card you take in a hand, the shadow player also may draw a card. So it gives them a bunch of Twilight and a bunch of
Yeah.
cards in hand,
So
which
Right.
you
makes it
tutor
actually,
3 and they draw 3.
Right. And so
yeah,
the thing about that is that what that does is that attacks the power level of the card. That makes it worse without actually changing what it does, right? And so
yeah,
if my concern was that Save from the Fire is too powerful, that would be the perfect response. That okay, we make it less powerful then, either by changing its power level or by increasing the cost. Because there's that saying that there's no such thing as an overpowered card, just an undercosted one. My concern, though, is not that Save from the Fire is unbalanced or that it is too powerful. My concern was simply that you include it in Ent deck, you include it in Night decks, you include it in whatever deck you possibly can. If you have Gandalf, you want to use it, and so like I said, that certainty was all I was trying to attack, was to mix it up and say that okay, I now no longer actually know if Save from the Fire is going to help my Gandalf deck here, it because it's now been altered and it's now been changed. Um, so that was my perspective. I still haven't sat down to make a full response on those proposals that he made, but in general, I feel like that's going to be my response. Is that my concern is not OP here. Uh, I'm really just trying to knock over the chessboard and make people try to figure out what's what again.
hmm.
And I know that this is not necessarily a perspective that is shared by everybody. Um, I would like things to be more balanced. Obviously, if a card wins you the game all the time, if a card is or a strategy is just so much more powerful than everything else, then obviously you wanna reel it in. But I also think that especially with the number of people we have, it's not ever going to be possible for us to balance. We want to swim in the direction of balance, but the currents are going to push us around. So with that in mind, balance needs to be a secondary concern, if that makes sense. Where is the
So I think just from a kind of errata philosophy, um, I don't know that. So I believe I disagree with you on errata philosophy, but not necessarily on what changes get us to the better situation. I'm strongly of the opinion that the we are moving in the right direction if a larger number of cards are being played.
yeah
Now, changing things up is going to do that. Taking down the highest power level stuff or buffing the lowest power level stuff all does that. And in a world where, I mean, in my ideal world where every single card is played in, I don't know what the percentage would have to be for how the breakdown works, but in a reasonably confined range percentage of decks, um, there kind of definitionally is going to be so many strategies that work because otherwise you wouldn't have all those cards played.
right.
Um, but I know in the channels we talk a lot about like win percentages, but I feel like we very rarely talk about play percentages, and I think that's often something that we should be paying a lot more attention to because for sure, like besiegers are absolutely dominating, but finding out what cards have the highest win percentages and what cards have the highest play percentages for those decks will adjust which kinds of players you're hitting. Are you hitting a really, really good player who likes this card? Or are you hitting a strategy as a whole that seems to be doing too well and is kind of crowding out space that other strategies like to kind of come into? So all of that fundamentally to not disagree with how we're necessarily changing things. But it's a different piece to keep in mind. I don't think that kind of the chaos you talk about is necessarily the right end goal so much as a strategy for getting there.
So one of the reasons why I don't bring up play percentages so much is because there's two different kinds. So let's see. So if a card isn't played, it's probably bad. That's
Mhm.
not always the case, but usually that is the case. People have determined that it doesn't actually get you anywhere. I mean, just sorting through the stats that we have here for old PC movie, most of the cards that are sitting here with very little play rate also have a terrible win rate. They kind of go hand in hand.
Right.
I tend to use these when I am looking for a card to buff, especially if I am like for instance, when we were talking about introducing some more possession hate into Fellowship Block, that becomes a very obvious way of buffing an unused card is to give it a new function,
Mhm.
so that it can now cover this particular area. However, once you get to the top of the rankings, it's a little bit more muddy, where you have your cards that have ridiculous win rates, get used a lot, of course, because they're strong. But then you also have cards that are used a lot, and are often viewed as staples. So, for instance, Shotgun and Quay is up here in the top 10, um, and he's still got a higher than perfectly balanced win rate to go along with that. It's more difficult to interpret, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. When you have a high play rate, versus I don't know, a high play rate with, well. So I guess what I'm actually trying to say is win rate and play rate kind of go hand in hand on the bad end of the spectrum. It's less clear on the high end of the spectrum, but on the
Mm.
bad end, it's very clear that bad cards just don't see play. And so that's why I look at win rate more than play rate, because they're kind of proxies for each other at the lower end.
And that's fair.
There was also that one weird case where practically everyone was invited was up near in the top 10,
Yep. And so
and
that was
with like 2 games.
so it has 1,000 games in old movie, and yeah, it had the highest win rate, out of all cards in movie, which is why I started to go for a more nuanced approach that managed to mix these two between the play rate and the win rate to try and get a different sorting. Because yeah, that was one of those situations where I was like, okay, like so somebody has a very successful deck that is Hobbit allies. It's probably Bilbo based or something, but Bilbo Ringbearer based, I mean. But at the same time, that's not necessarily an indicator of what we need to attack, because those are not the sorts of cards that people have a problem with. And so with this current sorting that I have on here, that comes up 200th on the list. Um, and up here on the top, we have all the usual suspects. A few surprises, but for the most part, cards that everybody knows are busted in one way or another. We have Glorfindel, we have Grond, we have Samwise, Son of Hamfast. Captured by the Ring isn't something that people complain about, but it is definitely in the same realm, I think, as Shotgun and Quaya here, where it gets used a lot because, of course, if you're playing with threats, you probably want to have this in your deck, and Smeagol can be a great, or sorry, the Golem can be a great splash for a number of different strategies. Um, but that's still like, I don't know. That still strikes me as something to pay attention to because of the combination of the number of games it is in and the relative success that it has as well. But I feel like this is a better sorting than what we had for just strict win rate. There's a lot of things. A lot of these have already been errated. So I feel like that kind of justifies some of what we've done a little
Yeah,
better.
I think seeing Sam and Legolas in this top 10 list, even though their win rates aren't crazy high, is
And so that actually kind of
clearly shows that this is a better sorting method.
Right, and see, that's also kind of why I'm looking for chaos, right? Because knowing that, okay, you include 2 copies of Handfast, or you're playing Elf, okay, you include a couple copies of Greenleaf. Those sorts of absolutely certain decisions are what I want to get away from.
Right. No, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I almost never don't splash Greenleaf
Mhm.
in a deck. Like, it could have nothing to do with elves. You throw one in because
It's
if
just
you
too
don't
good.
already have enough companions, he's cheap, he does the job he needs, and if you're playing against just super tanky things where he's going to be a liability, you throw him out there to die or you discard him.
Right. But then when we look at the but then when we look at his win rate, he wins at 53% of the time, which is more than 50, but at the same time that's kind of in that range where, like, for the number of decks that he's been in, he's not having an outsized effect. Like, it's not like you splash Greenleaf and suddenly you start winning.
Right,
Um,
but some of that is because Greenleaf is going to be in both decks.
yeah,
When you get to a high enough play rate, and that's why I kind of care more about the play rate than the win rate, is because
right.
when you get to that really high play rate, it, there's a very good chance that it's on both sides.
And
Uh,
that's definitely what you see with the rings. Almost all of the rings are that are played a lot are at 50%, because you have to include a winning
right.
ring, right? And so you're either going to win or going to lose. And if everybody's using answer all riddles, well, guess what? You've now got your exactly balanced win rate.
Right. Well, and when comparing things like rings, like you probably just want to compare them to each other in play rate.
Exactly, and
you
that's
know,
yeah, and that's
is answered all riddles being played every time and nobody's touching the ruling ring outside of sealed? Like maybe that's something to adjust.
exactly, and that's also where things get tricky with some of these as well. Do we just need to sort by type as well? Do we just want to compare minions to minions and companions to companions? Um, like, what? Trying to figure out how we need to be doing this is important. I do think that trying to have a data backbone to what we are doing is going to help us avoid subjective calls so much. Like, oh, I played against such and such a deck. Clearly, it needs nerfed. Obviously, we want to avoid any sort of accusations of that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, I won't claim to that we have the answer for how to create a sorting. Obviously, eventually, what I want is to be able to press a button in a way that just sorts all the cards and says, okay, these top 10 here, these are the ones we need to adjust. These need a nerf. The ones on the bottom need a buff, and have it be certain like that. But we're not there yet.
And so I don't think that it's necessarily that the top 10 all need a nerf. Like, just kind of picking out two real obvious ones, like Sam Summit Fanfest is too good. I don't think Unkea is too good. I think Unkea is one of the very few meta-defining tech pieces to keep a smaller fellowship on the board. It's that and greed.
Mhm.
I don't think you need to nerf Unkea. I think if you make a few more things for different factions that trigger off that 6 companion mark, you'll see Unkea drop down.
And
Just as an example here.
right, and I definitely agree that sometimes nerfs are not the immediate answer. Like Son of Handfast, for instance, is, I mean, before we started doing errata and adding cards and such, Son of Handfast was your only option for a lot of cultures. I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
suddenly say that, okay, yeah, sorry, these cultures are just screwed and they have to die to corruption, period. So part of the answer was Son of Handfast, and why I haven't continued to nerf him, even though he has continued to do well in PC movie, is that you need to you need to be fair. You need to have other options. We've introduced 2 options in the form of Gilrain's Memorial for Aragorn Signet decks, and They Sang as They Slew for Rohan, but that's about it. There's no options for dwarves. There's no options for uh, well, Gandalf already has options. He's got the ring that he can use. Elves are the ones that have the most options, I think. Um, well, no, sorry, that's not true. Shire definitely has the most options, but Elf has the most side options. They have like 2 or 3 different cards that interact with burdens, which is more than any other besides Shire.
Yep.
And
But those Shire cards are not getting splashed the same way Son of Hamfest is, even
exactly,
though Frodo's
yeah,
in, well, I suppose not every deck because there's alternate ring bearers, but
right, and
he's
yeah, yeah.
prevalent
Son of Handfast
enough
is
that
definitely the easiest to splash, and so that sort of thing. When we look at that decision, that, oh, it's easy to include Son of Handfast. It's obvious that you want to include him. I definitely want to address that, but I also agree that nerfing is not necessarily the way to get about that. That it has to be two pronged. You need to have other options first, and then you can say, all right, now we're going to nerf Son of Handfast so that it's not quite as splashable.
Right. Well,
We
understanding that, Son of Hamfest is so prevalent because he's a great companion, but because he's a great answer to one problem that's common.
exactly.
Compared to Greenleaf, who's so common because he's a great companion.
Yeah.
Like, if you try to compare Son of Handfest to other 2-point companions, it's gonna be hard to figure out how you would nerf him because he's kind of a lousy companion. That's
Yeah.
not his job.
Exactly. But that kind of ties into what I think about Shotgun and Quaya. That I do want there to be other better options. Well, that's sort of the problem. We don't want better options than in Quaya. We just want more options that are equivalent to him. There are quite a few spot six companions and or this secondary situation sort of minions. Like Shotgun Quay is not the only kind that follows his particular template. It's just that the two things that he spots, six companions and five burdens, are both like super flexible.
Mhm.
And he doesn't have any kind of cultural enforcement or anything. So he's kind of just at that intersection of super flexibility that most other six companion cards don't have. Um, so similarly to Hamfast, the way to address Enquea, I think, is to introduce more other options and then figure out a way to either disconnect his burden option or make it more Nazgul-y somehow. Like I'm not sure how to touch it because it's so solid, right?
I think step one there is definitely just have more options.
Yeah, for sure.
Because he's a real good example of one that I think his kind of the meta defining nature of things that kick off at six companions
Mhm.
is something that you don't want to mess with.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's why I haven't touched it because it's definitely a tentpole.
right.
It's foundational. If you don't have something like Quaya, then what you end up with is ants basically. You have people slapping down 9 companions and just running to the end. If you have 8 cards in your hand, you physically cannot have enough minions to actually touch the ring bearer. So like that's yeah, I totally get why his role exists. I just find it a bit of a travesty that there is exactly one card, and people like Phelan would raise their hand and say, "Well, there's not exactly one card, but still, like there's a very small cluster of answers that you have to include, and I feel like that should be increased. There ought to be like 6 to 10 different options that you might possibly go to based on what it is that you've chosen. If you're Moria, you want to do this. If you're Nazgul, you want to do this. If you're Raider, you want to do that. And some of those have options, but for most decks, it's you just shrug and say, nah, whatever. I'm going to include two copies of Enquay and call it good.
Right. And reasonably, I mean, I don't have the data to back this up, but I would guess that greed is more common than Inkea in Urkai decks.
Sure. Oh, for sure. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So Greed is like the one example of a better version of Enquea, because Greed can absolutely machine gun down everything on the table. Like having something that allows you to exhaust literally everybody. Yeah, that's better than Enquea.
right. But we don't have that for other factions. Like, they shouldn't all
Yes,
necessarily be better, but like you said, they should be more. They should tech into what they need to do.
yes,
You know,
exactly.
a Moria thing spots 6 companions and starts pulling more minions out.
Yeah,
A Isengard orc spots 6 companions and starts healing orcs.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would love to have different options. I don't want to take Enquea and copy paste them for a bunch of different things. But yeah, there clearly needs to be better answers for that. And that's how certain cards like this work. Is that if we're going to address them, that there has to be a more complicated answer. In other cases, we look at these cards and we could just say, okay, that particular thing that it does is too powerful. And I think that is, for the most part, what most of these are under, because most of these are not, automatic inclusion meta cards. They're just so good that why would you settle for anything less? Um,
Mhm.
we've got Radagast here. We got the Ithelstone. Why wouldn't you throw that in? We got Grant. I believe that Lady Redeemed is not too high on that list. She's in the top 50, but not.
Yeah, I don't think her problem is a strength issue. I think she's just not fun to play against.
She's not fun to play against, and I think that her numbers are so low on here because of the social pressure that people have yelled about her for decades at this point. And so people know that if I were to include her, there's a certain portion of the player base that will just leave my game.
Mm,
And so like I don't like that that's the answer, but I sort of get it at the same time. Um, and that's also why with my errata proposal, I tried to, instead of attacking her power level, which I agree with the people that have spoken up and said that her power level now in PC movie is probably acceptable. She's still tainted, and so I feel like the way to get around that is to attack the part of her that feels unfair. That it's not just the ability to wipe the whole board, which does suck, but it's the fact that you can include her for free in any deck, although you can't really utilize her in any deck unless you're elves. But that's the part that
right.
feels cheap. Um, so that's why I'm still harping on her, because people still have a hate boner for her. But anyway, so yeah, when I feel like the strategic thing that I'm trying to do with errata is mix things up. How I go about mixing those up is can change. We've had a lot of low hanging fruit in that there's a lot of very obvious strong things for us to nerf, and so I'm totally okay with mixing things up by tackling all the options that have existed. You can now no longer use, well, not that you can't use the super powerful cards, but we're going to make it so the super powerful cards are no longer the obvious answers that they were before. Um,
Mhm.
that's going to evolve over time. I feel like what the current most powerful card is obviously going to change, but I don't think that nerfing is necessarily always going to be the answer. In some cases, it might just be that okay, let's release some bonkers stuff and let's mix things up that way. Um,
I think I'd lean towards more of that than tampering with what's already there, because I think a large part of the reason that the community still sticks to this game is partially because of the nostalgia. If, say, you nerf Shotgun and Kea, you're probably going to see people be like, well, there's my favorite card from back in the day gone, and get discouraged.
and that's definitely the risk, is if you ever touch somebody's particular favorite card, they're not going to be happy. Um, on the other hand, one of my kind of my main thesis for why people return to this game is I know that I get into debates with people over whether it's just purely nostalgia. I ask, why are they nostalgic for it? Because it could just be that, oh yeah, it's Lord of the Rings, but if that's the case, there are other games, right? There's uh, the living card game that is only very recently out of print. There's the
Yeah.
Middle Earth
There's
card
a
game.
computer
There's
version of that as well.
Yeah. So it's like, why this particular game? And my argument for why this particular game is the one that people do feel nostalgic about is I think that it does a very, very good job of, like, and this was Decipher in general. They did an excellent job of capturing moments. Um, Things like the Bridge of Khazad-dûm and the Balrog in Fellowship of the Ring, with the way that that's set up. You have that set piece that is always showing up. It captures the moment of, oh crap, like we're gonna die unless we have an answer for this. How are we gonna get out of this? And often the answer is, oops, I just hit a button on my thing. That didn't ruin anything. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Um, and so I feel like the real reason why people feel nostalgic about it is because it does such a good job of capturing those moments while also making the game itself on its own mechanically interesting to interact with, right? So that I while I get that, yes, some people are going to have their favorite card altered and they're not going to be happy with it. I feel like we can kind of bypass that unhappiness so long as the card itself still captures what's going on. Shotgun and Quaya is not. There's nothing thematic about him. Um, like there's no particular Nazgul that is known for sneaking in and grabbing the uh, a, a companion off the back of the list. So like while I do think that there are some cards that are going to have a life of their own mechanically, um, I do feel that so long as we thread that needle and try to make sure that with every change that we are doing, we are trying to make the game marry its mechanics and its thematics, just like the Cipher did. I feel like eventually we will be in a point that has captured the thing that people are actually nostalgic for. Um, and so within those limits, there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot of numbers that we can tweak. There's a lot of abilities that we can change because those particular numbers and those particular abilities were not tied to why it felt awesome to play this card. If that makes sense. I could be totally wrong, but at the same time, we have errated like more than 100 cards, and people are still coming because I think we have managed to avoid making the mistake of, obliterating the theme of some of these cards. Um, is my take anyway. Um, we could end up I could end up being totally wrong about that, but that's kind of the direction I've been moving in. I admittedly have not been able to truly test this theory just because we've been drowning in low hanging fruit.
Mm.
All sorts of things that we could change that are obvious changes to make. Um, that will really be tested once we start to get into things like the site path changes, and I eventually want to be able to make V sets that are moving beyond the movies, or doing things like I want to have a set based around the Hunt for Gollum or something like that. That is not necessarily a within the boundaries of what this game is set up to do, and we will have to change some things to make those sorts of stories be tellable. And that I think will test the theory in a more pure form. But until then, until I've eaten my words or not, that is kind of the direction that I'm trying to aim for.
I think that I'm mostly just an old codger wanting to say, slow down and do things slow, and I feel like everyone else is moving very quickly compared to me, but for the most part, I would agree with you there.
Yeah, and so like this comes up every time that DMAS jumps into the conversation because he's the same way of saying we need to pump the brakes. The thing is, he's been telling like I he's been telling us specifically, and I've been hearing other people saying that we need to do the smallest number of changes possible from the very beginning. I have always fought, had to fight resistance to making any sort of changes whatsoever, and I think that at the very least, I have been given a modicum of having proven that there's a lot more that we can change than people thought. Um,
Mm.
People just want to go in and make very very small scalpel cut changes to these things, but we can actually mess with a lot more than that before people get mad. Not to say that we should necessarily push the limits on that, but there's more for us to work here than people think. And there's always going to be resistance that says no, slow down, no, do fewer changes. What matters at the end is the quality of the result. So long as we keep our eyes on the prize of actually trying to make a game that is engaging and cool and awesome to play, that is what's going to make the difference, not whether or not that took 10 card changes or 1,000 card changes. Um,
So that is definitely one of the things kind of spurred the concept of this call in the first place was how much can you be willing to change a card? And I'm with you. I think if a card doesn't work, start over with it. But that's definitely a thing that is not. There's no consent on that.
yeah.
I'd say I agree with the caveat that if a I wouldn't say ever if a card is broken and you can't figure out how to make it less powerful, don't ever go back and start over. Try to make it less powerful.
That's
Like,
fair. A card that's used a lot but is too good and kind of therefore pushes other cards out of the pool. I think
yeah, I wouldn't say
you're
ever
right.
completely rework that.
Make it do the kind of thing that it was meant to do, at least thematically. Whether you tweak a number or tweak a cost or change the effect, but within the same kind of concept. This is still about corrupting the ring bearer kind of deal. But a card, light-footed is the one I keep harping on because it's the lowest play rate overall. Uh, it, it's terrible. Like, I'm fine with keeping it thematically kind of about anti-archery, but like just start over on it.
So
And
this
it's
is
a lot easier to do for cards that are never played.
right. And so this is something that I have actually been meaning to like make a video on or something on the topic, and I've been kind of that's a terrible arrow. Kind of trying to refine my thoughts on it. But when it comes to errata-ing a particular card, I feel like there's at least two different axes to look at. And this may be a retread of some of the stuff that we've done. But on one axis, you have power, right? So you have your OP cards on the one end, you have your underpowered cards on the other end. A power level can obviously very drastically affect how good or how well received a particular card is going to be. But then on the other axis, we have what I have been calling NPE, and I think that I may need to come up with a better term for it.
Fun.
Well, not just that actually. That whether or not something is what I think of as NPE is whether or not it runs counter to how the game should be played. So obviously the first thing you think of is it fun? But really it's more about does this match the game's design? So Horn of Boromir, for instance, is a good example of what I would call NPE on this axis. Um, the rule of 9 is something that should probably not be broken, um, because that is something that we have found very much kind of defines whether or not the shadow even has a hope, right? If I'm mowing down allies that have been horned, site after site after site, and I don't make any progress because there's always more allies, then that's kind of hopeless, right? Obviously, in the moment, the player's just going to say, "Yeah, that's not fun." But the underlying reason for that symptom of not fun is, I think, because it's toxic, right? It runs counter to how the game should be played. Um, and so that's why, for instance, I have been attacking discard, for instance, recently, and choke, because these are things which don't necessarily like, especially discard. Discard is one of those things that was hugely NPE, but it was also totally underpowered. It was so easy to beat. And so it was kind of an easy sell because people were like, "Oh yeah, that sucks." Like nobody actually likes playing it. You just do it for, I don't know, Schadenfreude or something. But if you actually cared about winning, it didn't actually get you anywhere. Choke, on the other hand, is something that is something that actually works, right? It's somewhere up here, where it can actually get you a result, but it's also kind of just running counter to what I think the game is about. Like, I play a card game to play cards. Like, I'm sorry if that's a controversial take, but so when you have a strategy that makes it so that I can't play any cards, that kind of defeats the purpose of me having sat down, right? Discard really directly affects that by making sure that I have 0 cards, but choke makes it so that I have no resources. I have no ability to actually put my cards down and play the damn game. Um,
I think choke's bigger problem is not just that it makes it so you can't play cards; it's that it locks your hand. If choke made
sure,
it so
yeah,
you
I
could
mean
play less
it's yeah,
things, but you still had all your cycling capacity, but choke stops your shadow from playing much, which stops your free peoples from doing well.
yeah, and so it kind of compounds, right? Um, and yeah, I mean honestly, I place that at the OP part. Like that is the power level of choke. Is that, yeah, it slows down your entire deck, slows down both sides. That is it's powerful enough that it has a good effect on your ability to win the game. Um, but as far as the what I've called NPC part or NPE part, like it's just about, I want to play my damn cards, and that does tie in that now neither of my sides can play cards, because my shadow is not able to cycle, and so my free peoples gets gummed up, and so it gets eaten alive by your shadow, and yeah, so like it is kind of tied together, but I feel like the part that we need to address about choke is not necessarily the win rate of it, but the parts that run counter to why we are playing the game, which is why, when I'm looking at how to rework choke, the sorts of things that I'm looking at are stuff like, let's rework this so that it's still about sneaking with as few companions as possible. It's still about having hyper efficient cards, but it's no longer about increasing the cost of the relative cost of what you're able to play. Um,
Off the top of my head, I can think of a couple ways to do that, like making it harder for minions to be assigned to companions, making it harder but also as a counter, making it harder for that fellowship to move quickly.
yeah, I mean you could that's kind of why I bandy about the idea of an Aragorn that is naturally Defender +1, if there's if you manage to keep the Twilight Pool below a certain point, because that does the same thing, right? You've effectively got 3 companions where you previously had 2,
You
and
can
so
do a lot of that just based on spotting numbers of companions.
Mhm.
As while you cannot spot 4 companions,
Yeah,
something gets stronger.
exactly. And so that's kind of the angle that I've been gearing towards of preserving what's good about choke, because that was actually something that surprised me quite a bit. A couple of years ago, I did a pair of threads on the Facebook group. One of them I said, "What's the worst mechanic in Lord of the Rings?" And on the other I said, "What's your favorite mechanic in Lord of the Rings?" And I was surprised that there were people that really enjoyed choke. And when interrogated, they wouldn't what they didn't talk about, oh well, I like frustrating my opponent, but they just said, I like the sneakiness. I like that I'm role playing as somebody that is trying to avoid the enemy's attention. I like that kind of stuff, and so that's really what got my gears turning. There's nobody that likes discard for thematic reasons, but obviously there is something thematic here that we can preserve. We can have an Aragorn that works better in a small companionship. We can have these sneaky elements that don't completely torpedo your opponent's ability to engage in the game. Um, and so that also kind of gets into the errata philosophy here, because performing those sorts of alterations to those cards is a lot like banning them and replacing them with something else. Um, you no longer have No Stranger to the Shadow. You no longer have Build a Pony. You now have a completely different set of cards that does something different. Um, and that's also kind of one of the things that we have to talk about, because I have been using errata the way that Dota just talks about a patch, right? You can have a patch that introduces both buffs and nerfs, and I'm equally okay with either. But I can understand too, though, how some people might view the word errata as just meaning, yeah, you are fixing a broken part of the game, when that's not
Mm,
really all I'm doing. Um,
right, making a PC version of this, or making a
exactly.
you
Yeah.
um,
Revamp or redux or something like that's a way of capturing the
Question
we're go ahead.
the question is always how far does that go? Like, are you going if you go to get to the point that you're making a completely different game, just market it as such, say it's inspired, but like I don't get the allure of taking Lord of the Rings trading card game and turning it into something entirely different that doesn't function the same way.
So my counter to that would be, what if Decipher was still making the game today? Would it look exactly the same as the fossilized version that we got?
I have no clue.
True,
I, you
but
look at any other game that's been around that long. I haven't played Magic since middle school. Well, not I haven't played. I haven't owned Magic cards since middle school, but I have friends who play, and occasionally I sit down, and it's not the same game that I played.
yeah.
Like, there's still lands, and there's still strength and toughness, and but like I don't understand half the cards. It's not just having played the same game with a new set of cards. It is a different game over time.
Mhm.
And I think any game that sticks around for long enough is gonna have that.
And that's kind of how I look at it too. 5 to 10 years from now, if we're still hacking at this, things are going to look different. If it doesn't look different, that means that we didn't actually change anything, which is kind of pathetic, to be honest. Um,
Yeah, there's certainly things you don't want to leave the spirit of. Like, I don't think we should ever talk about a deck that isn't half Free People's, half Shadow.
sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a fundamental nature of the way this game is played. But changing how mulligans work to feel better, like, yeah, it's a different game. It's changing a rule fundamentally, but it's not changing the way the game feels.
And this actually
Um,
gets at one of the things that I want to alter about the game, which I don't think some people are going to claim that this makes it a different game, but I would argue that it remains fundamentally the same game. It just opens our horizons. Is I want to attack the concept of a ring bearer, not not the role of a ring bearer. I do think that there needs to be a king piece that is the piece that does not, like, if you lose this companion, you lose the game kind of aspect. But I think that only tying it to it being just the ring bearer, just being a Frodo proxy, is something that is frankly kind of a mistake. Um, I think that we could, like I've discussed various ways of handling this, the quest cards and stuff of that nature. But being able to decide when you are building your deck that, okay, for this deck, I am doing, like I mentioned, the hunt for Gollum. My main character is Aragorn, and I'm going to have stuff about trying to track down a particular kind of minion or something, and that is what I'm doing with this deck. I could have another deck that is Theoden trying to muster the Rohirrim, and so I get bonuses for playing or stacking companions or something, and that is kind of what I'm doing. I still have my central Theoden character, and if I lose Theoden, I lose the game. Just like if I lose Frodo, I lose the game. But at the same time, it opens up the horizons without necessarily altering much about the mechanics either. It just rebrands what it is that we've done. Now, some people are going to take one look at that and they're going to say, no, that's a completely different game. A lot of those same people are going to be the ones that took one look at alternate ring bearers and said, no, this is a different game. I'm not touching that. But I would argue that you sit down and you when you play your cards, what actually fundamentally changes about how you play this game with your opponent? Not much. You're calling things different things. There are different labels for what you have on the table, and there's different, like, I don't know, thematic goals for what it is that you're doing. You're no longer taking the ring to Mordor down the 9 sites. But I'd say, let's be real, you never took the ring to Mordor. You just went down 9 sites and then declared the end of the game. So why not just open that up and say, well, all right, I am actually just traveling to Minas Tirith. I am just trying to track down Gollum in the Wastes. I'm trying to get Luthien to Baron at the end of the, in Angband or whatever. I feel like there's much wider horizons that we can do with these particular mechanics without actually changing much about them, just changing what we call
Yeah, I mean, if ultimately what you're saying is kind of step away from the actual game terminology, but you have a king piece and you have a MacGuffin,
them.
and those things in some way determine how you move.
Yeah, they determine how you move. They determine how you get burdens. They determine how there's going to be some restriction on there that makes it so that the you don't want your king piece to skirmish. Um, like you do all that, and you have precisely the game that we have today, as I would
Yeah,
argue. But
I think that's absolutely true. If I want to put Boromir as my king piece and his ring, quote unquote, is
make
bring
it to,
glory to Gondor.
or get to Rivendell, right? These
Sure.
are actual stories that we can actually tell. And that's where I want to take VSETs in, right? I really want to go in that direction of us being able to take a slice of the story and say, okay, this is the story that we're going to tell. We're going to tell the Scouring of the Shire. That's going to happen. And so I want us to be able to have different protagonists for that particular kind of story.
Yeah, because that's post ring, so that makes sense.
Yeah,
There's no way to do it with the ring.
exactly. And so I feel like that would actually probably be the perfect stepping off point because of what you say. Yeah, there can't be a ring at this point. So it's got to be something else. It's got to be Sam having a condition on him that is, love for his homeland or something. Or Merry or Pippin trying to rally the Tooks or rally the Brandybucks, and that's just kind of the name of this condition like card that is attached that has something to do with burdens, but is otherwise completely recontextualized as far as what we're doing. And then from there, we can do some other stuff. I mentioned the mustering of the Rohirrim. I would like to be able to have a Rohan centerpiece. I think that it would be a terrible idea for that to be an alternate ring bearer. People talk about this all the time. One of the things that Decipher did, that I found was interesting, was that all of the alternate ring bearers are characters that actually could have touched the ring at one point, or it might have actually been people that actually did physically touch the ring. Now that I think about it,
Isildur's ring bearer, for instance, makes perfect sense.
well,
Gimli maybe not so much. Like
he hit it with his axe.
Right,
So.
he's physically in proximity. He could have grabbed it, but
Gimli is quest
nothing
bearer,
about the story
bears his
suggests that he
axe.
does that.
Right.
But
And
Gimli
that's
as a dwarf who wants to,
Gimli as centerpiece to your dwarf deck makes perfect mechanical sense.
right,
But
absolutely.
I feel like it just needs to be recontextualized so that it also makes story sense. Um, I would like to have something that is, the people from Erebor trying to, just trying to fend off the forces of shadow that are invading them during this whole time. I'd like for there to be, why can't you play as Brand kind of thing, and just have that be the storyline. Why can't I play as Galadriel marching armies around Lothlorien while all this stuff is happening with the One Ring? Like that kind of thing should be able to be told. And at the moment, it's just kind of half-assed, right? Yeah, you can take whatever main character you want, so long as it represents a particular culture. Um, Thematically, it does not make sense for Eowyn to be a ring bearer, right? But there's plenty of stories we could tell where it would make perfect sense to have Eowyn as our central character that cannot die.
absolutely. I see Zero, as long as fundamentally it can still play against another, against an opponent who is using Frodo and the One Ring.
Sure, and that's
I see no problem here.
exactly, yeah. But at the same time, so the reason I bring all this up is that is the sort of direction I want to take this in. And there are people that are going to look at that and they're going to say this is now a different game, which is why, like, I can't take the phrase "a different game" that seriously. Um, I feel like I aim to preserve the mechanics, like physically what you are doing. I aim to preserve the thematic elements, and in fact, if I can hack it, I want to make them much better than they ever were after Fellowship of the Ring. I mean,
Mhm.
look at the Two Towers. Even you can totally have a Rohan based deck that is dragging Frodo through Helm's Deep. Like you have totally lost a lot of the thematic elements that made Fellowship of the Ring so great. Even just by that point.
You mean my Gimli, Denethor, Gandalf smoking deck isn't theme appropriate? I don't know what you're talking about.
But so anyway, that those are my thoughts on different game. I want to make a slightly different game, to be very honest. Um, I feel like by the time we're done with all this, like 10 years from now, we might look back and be like, yeah, this is kind of a 2.0. Um, Everything that we thought that Lord of the Rings should have been and wasn't because of various commercial constraints or manpower constraints at Decipher or whatever else. And honestly, I think that's okay. Um, we just need to actually we need to figure out what it is that we think about the game needs to be preserve that, and then if it involves 1,000 errata, I'm okay with there being 1,000 errata. Um,
Yeah,
Think of
there's obvious hurdles like Twilight Nazgul, and you remove the theme of Twilight Nazgul attacking the ring bearer. Because you're no longer getting someone who's a ring bearer, you're just getting some random dude that Nazgul wouldn't care about. They care about the ring. So that is an obvious hurdle that you have to get over.
so that sort of thing would be obvious, but then we have things like Easterlings who care about burdens and do not give two shits about the ring. And
right.
Yes, that is
like
something that would work really well.
mhm.
Is it would make Easterlings make so much more sense.
And so you're right that there are some cases like that where it would lose out.
I
I,
I
I
think
I do
that's
agree with that.
okay. Yeah, I mean, because you come to a table with Free Peoples and a Shadow, and you're not playing out the books or the movies. You're playing out a alternate universe, what maybe
Thing,
could have
yeah.
happened. So Nazgul and Twilight, I mean, which are reasonably just a way of having separated Nazgul into a second camp early on. Um, maybe Sauron really doesn't want Rohan to be united. Wants to see the Westfold fall. Um,
Trying to attack Aragorn before he becomes king, kind of thing. Like
right.
there's yeah.
Yeah, there's
I do think
it's
that there will
silly when we
be
look at the story and say this isn't what happened, because we know it's not what happened.
yeah.
We're actually trying to make it not what happened, right? Like,
And that's something
who,
that I've gotten into a lot when talking about how Fellowship of the Ring was thematic, because there's this game is only thematic in isolation. You look at a single slice, a single play of a card, a single site, a single companion, and it will be perfectly thematic. But when you zoom out, you realize that you have dwarves dragging Frodo to Rivendell while getting attacked by Sauron orcs, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is like off the rails already. It feels plausible, but it's and people's spider sense do start to go off once you start introducing things like time traveling Gilgalad and Isildur Ringbearer during the Third Age, and you're kind of like, okay, this is a little weird, but at the same time, that's no different from what we were doing before. It's just crossed, I don't know, some internal thematic line.
yeah,
But
It's transcended a different dimension.
yeah, and honestly, this is actually one of the reasons why I'm excited about the idea of the multipath concept of having a card that says this is the path that you're using, because I think that that's also going to be a proxy for these are the themes that we're following. If I am if I want to have a perfectly thematic pair of decks against somebody, we might say, okay, we are playing the fellowship site path, so I'm going to be using Frodo with the One Ring, which means that when you pull out your Twilight Nazgul, it's perfectly thematic, and that is represented in the game by the fact that we have the exact same Sight Path card, right? So
And it's already been talked about, as far as the next step of that multipath is
right,
potentially, quests that limit you further but give some advantage.
exactly, yeah. And so like I feel like that's definitely the direction to go in, because in the games where you and your opponent have different sight paths, it's just kind of a thing where you shrug and say, okay, like I guess things are going to be less than perfect thematically. My Twilight Nazgul are going to be attacking my mustering Theoden, but like we kind of knew that going in because we knew that we were going to have different sight paths. And so like
And we
I
do
don't
that
know.
in movie today.
Yeah,
Like,
like
you don't only play people who are at, Osgiliath in movie block.
right. Oh no,
I'm
the Morgan
pretty
people have
sure.
jumped out in Minas Tirith. Like
Right,
yeah, like
where did all
it's
these orcs come from?
right.
Why is
Evidently, they
that
were
one
very busy
particular
underground.
troll?
Yeah,
Right.
they've been digging a tunnel the whole time. But yeah, like that's so yeah. But I like the signaling. I like the ability to say that okay, you want a thematic game, then you both go play the same sight path, and that will ease your transition a little bit. But
So here's a question I have because you want to release the multipath changes with V2.
mhm.
Do you want us to make a card that will do that, or are you intending to do that later on?
So I am intending that when we release um, the multipath change, it comes with the new card, and I would have to go through and figure out all the finickiness of adding a new card type and having it be enforced in the deck builder and all that jazz. That's going to be on me. But then once it's in place, I expect that for on your guys' side, all you have to do is assume that you're going to be using the tower's path, and I'll take care of the rest. Um, where is the
So V2 comes with a fundamental rule change that
right
you have one more mandatory card, ring bearer, ring, and
sight path card,
quest or
whatever
sight
we
path
call it?
marker
Yeah,
or whatever it is.
yeah.
Um,
Map.
map,
Ooh,
I like that.
map. Oh, I do like that actually. Um, and in fact, we've already got a kind of a mock-up here.
Maybe later down the road. I'm not suggesting we do this for V2 because Finarfin's a little bit finicky about adding something that fundamentally different to the game, but doing a card like a Pathfinder, and that's the companion that you use to play your sites. It can be Aragorn or Smeagol or Gandalf or someone who thematically led, but that's the person you use. That's the card that determines what sites you use.
So you mean like a companion that does it
Yeah, and it
specifically?
has like a keyword like Ringbearer that's like Pathfinder. I'm just spitballing here, but whether it be a map or a Pathfinder or something, we should probably iron that out really quick because we're running out of time.
I
Oh,
think linking it to a companion is going to greatly limit deck choice.
yeah, and I definitely do think that we should probably attach it to since we are doing a new mechanic, new everything, having it attached to a new card type that has space for its own this here has plenty of lines that we can stick whatever we need to on it. Rather than needing to have it do that on a companion, and it also has to function as a companion. Um, I think that this is more or less what we ought to go for. But yeah. So anyway, so as far as your question for what to do, just pretend like you are like V2 is being released for a theoretical PC towers that uses the tower site path, and I'll be mucking up the three different map cards. I do like that map name. Three different map cards that are basically you saying, okay, I'm playing Fellowship Path, Towers Path, or King Path. Exactly the way that it works in multipath now. The only difference
Just with
being,
a marker.
yeah, there will
Okay.
be a specific card that says this is how we're playing, and for balance purposes, we might have some other additional mechanics in there. Like the mock-up that I had, for instance, would say that even if your opponent is not playing the Fellowship site path, they can play Anduin Confluence um, out of your deck or something. Uh, so
Maybe
you know,
when they choose to play a site, you can alter it so that hey, they can choose to either play their site or your site if they like it more.
yeah, we could do something like that. My Confluence example was one that obviously, if you're playing an ally deck, you're not going to include into
Yeah.
Confluence.
Right.
And so being able to pull those things from a sideboard or something and say, okay, yeah, this is, you're not going to be able to surprise your opponent who's playing a king path and totally get away with the ally abuse. There's going to be guidelines in place, guardrails, so that we can make it so that you can like we can actually balance the three different side paths against each other. That was really the sort of thinking behind it. But we can hash out what exactly those sorts of mechanics need to be.
We need to
Um,
figure out how home sites and cards that reference sites work with that too.
yep, and along with that too, I want to start abolishing the well, for one, we're going to need to come up with a fellowship block icon. But I want to start abolishing the stupid any site stuff. I want to be able to say that okay, stealth works at sites 1 to 4, just any site 1 to 4, right? Um,
Hmm.
and so yeah, there's a number of things from Fellowship Block that will have to be changed. Home site is one. Home site, I think, actually with the multipath concept will probably be straightforward. Uh, they have a home site of 3 Fellowship, and if you're not on the Fellowship site block, then it
Right.
doesn't
So
work.
your ally deck wants to go second,
Yeah.
and you hope that your
So,
opponent isn't playing Pathfinder.
somewhat related, when we allow for multipath, there will be people who run like some movie block shadow and run Bridge of Khazad Doom because it's the only site 5, and out pops the Balrog as a one-off. Let's just throw this out to narrow down the fellowship. Are we okay with introducing that to movie, or do we want to limit it somehow?
I think so.
True if they're using Fellowship and are behind.
So my thing is, we played one of the galas. I think was a multipath gala,
Yep,
and it was so much more interesting and engaging. Uh, Mostly just because the king path is shit,
well,
Yeah,
and
it is.
that's putting it mildly.
yeah, completely boring. Like I feel like with every site, they like even though there's variants, it's like oh here's the threat site, oh here's the burden site, and it's like geez guys, like you couldn't mix it up and put a few of them on different numbers or something. Um,
And the lack of faction support, like just having Moria site options in movie will make Moria worth playing more in movie.
yeah, oh for sure, yeah. And so I think that it's going to be from a mechanical perspective, it's going to be a major improvement. Um, you're going to be able to like Isengard is going to get a boost because they're going to be able to start using stuff from Towers Block, which there are plenty of Isengard supporting cards over there. Um,
Or even Fellowship. Summon of
yeah,
Amen is
yeah,
bonkers for.
Same with Holland, making them not roaming a site early.
oh yeah,
Mm.
yeah, true. But yeah, like I think it's going to be a mechanical hit. Um, And honestly, I'm okay with any of the thematic losses because I mean we're already playing warrior cards at minus tier, so I don't think that there's much to be lost from a thematic perspective.
I think for
I
a
still
lot of
cling to
people,
my tunnel theory.
Yeah,
I think for lots of folks, that's also how they used to play casually.
yeah, oh yeah. The
Yeah,
the 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 kitchen table where we just pull out whatever and play whatever we have. Yeah, I mean I think
the
that
way that
it's
the way that I
good.
play with my friends physically is we don't even care about block symbols. We just throw together 1 through 9.
Yep, and that's extremely common. I think it's actually something that I considered. Well, so one of the things I have on the drive here somewhere is a site rework that would try to unify everything, and I think it would end up looking a lot like that. Is just having yeah, it was that grand site rework. So you would just end up with a bajillion like mixing all the different blocks together, and who cares what the block is? The block has significance for the cards that you are playing, but when you are building your deck, you just need a 1 through 9. Um, and that's one angle we could take, but I think that the multipath option is superior. Um, having given it some thought. So
And the multipath option doesn't strictly stop that. There's nothing stopping you from, in V3 making a
making
map
a
card that
new
says
exactly,
use any sites as long
and
as you have
that's
a 1 through 9, and then maybe
precisely
here's some penalty to make it not the obvious always answer.
exactly, and that's the thing that really appeals to me about the map plus multipath, because it allows us to hot patch it without needing to make fundamental format rules. Because that was the only thing that sucked about multipath before, was that it was a format rule. So if we wanted to come in and add a new site path, well, that means that we have to change the definition of the format. But this means we don't have to do that. You just release more cards and you're good.
Right, and I still super want to see that. You start in the Shire, you end at Mount Doom, single site 9,
And now that
cohesive
we
journey
have
path.
like a framework for inserting it into, I'm actually totally down for having a VSET that is based around this new site path that is, yeah, the 533 or 522 or whatever it was, division. Like I'm totally all for seeing that. And it's a possibility now, where before it would have been really annoying, I think, to make a one-off format that only does it this way.
No, yeah, I think this is the better answer. 100%
Yeah.
on board with that. I
I'm
mean,
gonna
I
have
will
to.
be playing that site path once it exists, but
Yeah.
And see, that's also kind of the nice thing too, is that it's one thing if nobody plays your format. Oh well, or rather, I mean, it's one thing if nobody plays your cards, but it's another thing if nobody plays your format, because that can be a very difficult chicken and egg problem of people not wanting to play because nobody plays it. And
right.
but this, it's just like, oh yeah, it's just a particular deck that you happen to build in an existing format. So yeah, yeah, I'm excited. I definitely dig that direction.
I'm
Agreed.
gonna have to bow out of the meeting now. I have to go. It's
Okay,
been good talking.
yeah, it's been good. Um, yeah, I guess we may as well wrap it up then.
Yeah.
So
Really nice actually chatting with you guys.
yeah, yeah, I do enjoy having these. I have tried to make them monthly, but yeah, it just doesn't
If
happen.
there's any way to shorten them, it might be nicer though.
And well, that is sort of the problem, right? We don't have them often enough, and so there's always a bajillion things to talk about. And yeah, and I like to gab, so that
Hmm.
does yeah, definitely a problem, but I don't know how to fix it. Okay, well, yeah, so that's all. I'll go ahead and stop the recording now, I guess. Oh, or wait, was there anything else about these things? Any final thoughts that occurred to anyone? No.
I don't feel like from a philosophy perspective here that the three of us may all be on a similar page, but I'm real hesitant to suggest that that means that everyone else is now also on that page.
For sure, and yeah, that's. I mean, we'll post the video, and hopefully other people will watch it. We'll try to come to a um, some sort of agreement on what we're going to do there. For now, my intent is to try to try to rein in the changes that I proposed, and reduce it more to something that is more balanced, focused, and go from there. I guess we'll just have to keep continuing to talk about this until we get it figured out. So, okay, I'll go ahead and stop the recording then. Thanks to everyone on YouTube that watched this. If you have any comments, please leave them below, I guess.